Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be discussing driving digital transformation through the Agile PMO. My name is Doug Welsby, and I'm the channel manager here at Wickersoft. I'm also joined by my colleague Richard Evans, our Managing Director of Advisory Services. During today's webinar, attendees will be on mute and the line will not be open for questions. However, feel free to use the GoToWebinar question feature to submit questions. I will address these questions during the webinar and will respond via email if we do not get to your specific question. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away from the webinar, no need to worry, as I will be emailing a link to the presentation once it has been posted to our YouTube channel. I'll now turn the presentation over to Richard, who will be handling the webinar.
Great, thanks very much, Doug. This is Richard Evans, and welcome everybody. I hope everyone's day is going well so far. So yes, welcome everybody. Today, topics to cover are digital transformation. What does it mean? How is it right now? How is that impacting project organizations and PMOs? That includes talking about how PMOs evolve and what the different shapes and sizes of PMOs look like in the past and today. I want to provide some practical tips for evolving in a new direction. So some things are big and scary and transformational, but there's some things you can do locally without it being a massive change. Talk a bit about the project staff and the PMO staff for the future, and also look at how tools and technology in alignment with a data strategy for being agile and supporting transformation, how that is evolving as well, and what some of the leading practices look like. Now, people of course use this term digital transformation a lot. You hear it all over the place, and it means all kinds of things to different people. I think from what I've heard and seen this year, if I was to try and summarize how this really lands, if you're a project organization, is really represented in that top box there, that there's this drive to go faster with projects and products, to be more proactive as a project organization. So instead of taking orders or responding to requests and requirements, actually being proactive in coming up with solutions and ideas for projects. And of course, innovation. So looking at, the ability to look at things happening in the organization and saying, oh, we could automate that, or we could use some artificial intelligence on that. So that, in a nutshell, if I was to summarize all the different flavors of transformation affecting PMOs this year, that would be my summary of that. Now, of course, if you're in a PMO, or maybe you don't use that term, you're in some kind of product or project organization, you're having to balance that pressure with, well, how do we keep the trains running on time? How do we change and transform and keep up with those requests without breaking the fundamentals of what we're doing as an organization or as a PMO today? And also, part of that question right now is, well, what kind of people, what are our roles look like in the future as a PMO? And before I get into that, I was thinking, well, here we are, we're in October already, and Doug and I were just talking about the snow starting to fall in North America. And back in January, I pulled up a thing I wrote back in January this year, predicting what would be some of the trends in 2019. And these were the 6 things that I was talking about. And I spend most of my time with organizations and customers as a services person, and I would say all of these things have been very prominent this year consolidation of PMOs, and that includes as well this sort of cross collaboration between, let's say, an IT PMO and an engineering PMO and a business PMO. Seen some of that going on, and that's a really interesting force for change. Simplifying project management. People want to do things in a quick and agile way. Tools and data strategies are changing. I'll talk about that. Agile remains a really big driving factor in this. So I'll share some thoughts about Agile today. And then, of course, the skills change, and program management is changing. By program management, I mean very significant, large initiatives made up of different projects. That's evolving along the Agile lines as well. But let's get practical. What are some of my tips or things I've learned this year as a way to get started on this without necessarily having to eat the whole elephant in one go? And a good starting point is thinking about what's the right size and shape of my PMO. And there's different models for PMO types. This is the one I've drawn up this year because all these things keep changing. And it's important to note as well that as a PMO, you're constantly evolving. It's not like you achieve a certain state and then you're done. It's a constant change, just like transformation and digitization of business models is constantly in flow. But these are what I see from my experiences as the big types right now. We've got on the left, the visibility and compliance PMO. It's all about providing visibility, gathering data, making sure people are complying with processes like stage gates. And my nickname for that is, the PMO that switches on the lights and shows you where the cockroaches are. The next one is an enabling PMO where you've got more of a proactive approach. So instead of controlling and being compliance focused, give me your data, you're leaning more into spotting programs and projects that need help, and also not just providing data, but actually providing an opinion and insights into things that help the executive level with strategic planning and prioritization and so on. And then you've got the virtual PMO. I said earlier that there's certainly a trend towards consolidation, and a virtual PMO can be many different shapes and sizes, but the idea here is you've got a community of shared interest across the business. It might start off as a very informal, unstructured thing, and may not even ever achieve the status of an enterprise project management office that's very well structured. It might remain a virtual thing, and that's actually fine too. And in these scenarios, often the terms PMO may even have a bad connotation and may feel like overhead or a taxation, some people say. So this may just be called something like a community of practice, or the virtual strategic execution office or something. And then a good way to do this is the federated model, where you agree as a community of interest across the organization, no matter what your discipline or business unit is. You agree on some basic fundamental standards of management and data and prioritization, but then let everybody build on top of that to be free to do what they need to do as a business unit. And then finally, you've got this emerging unicorn of the Agile PMO, which is in some ways a balance of all of those three things ahead of it. And to be honest, nobody's really doing this, as far as I can tell, in a 100% optimized way. This is, again, an aspirational thing. But yeah, an Agile PMO is taking all of those principles in Agile that help businesses move faster and be more proactive and more customer and solution oriented, and much more reliant and trusting of their people to come up with great ideas and do good things without a lot of control. It's balancing all of those things with an overall framework of how to actually successfully manage within the Agile context. So a good starting point is to think through this and decide with business sponsors where we are today and where we want to be and for what reasons. And like I said, everybody is in reality a mix of these things. It's not really the case that you're one or the other. So everybody's target state is always going to be somewhat unique to them. My next tip is, if something very simple, if you haven't yet, then I strongly recommend you to read up on Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe. You can see it in the top left there, which scaledagileparamework.com has a lot of public free information, a lot actually, that really it's quite useful. And I recommend getting to grips with all of that, because we as a company at Microsoft have embraced that when we're in a situation where we are taking on a big transformation for beginning with business reasons, to go, let's say, go faster, be more proactive, and there's some discussion around, well, what is the method? It always ends up being tailored, of course, but this is, we feel, the right place to start for the modern PMO. And here are the principles, if you haven't seen them already, and all of these, of course, support making digital transformation projects much richer. So, and it's hard to argue with a lot of these. So, taking an economic view of all work, meaning what's the value of that work? How do I measure the value of that work? Systems thinking, building incrementally with fast learning cycles. I've seen that really mature this year, so that this idea of switching to an agile mode to build solutions, or whatever it is you're doing, meaning you show your stakeholders something tangible early on to get them to react to it, to give feedback, is such a powerful way to move quickly, but also to avoid all those pitfalls of disappearing for weeks or months at end as a project team, working on requirements and designs and things, only for the marketplace or for expectations to have somehow drifted past you. So Agile as a way to create solutions and projects is I feel working very effectively. Visualizing work in progress, that's an easy step. We'll look at that in a second. And that's actually a very powerful tool just in itself. And at the bottom there's two important things about people and culture and staff for the future, I think. And one is that Agile relies more on trusting small teams to make decisions within the context of an Agile framework. So it's less about centralized control and more about enabling people to do the right thing. And you have all, of course, these checks and balances built into Agile, like stand-up meetings, and of course the data, being able to see what's going on in terms of economics and so on with the project, and surfacing data is very helpful, because if you surface a lot of data on what's going on in projects, then it tends to result in people interfering less to try and find out what's going on. It gives you a bit more breathing room to operate. So what are some of the things around scaling Agile you can do quite practically? Well, on the left side there, on the easier side there is as a PMO, a good way to get started without it being a major transformation initiative at the start is to, if you haven't done so already, is identify ideally a program or a project, and apply this idea of the team of teams approach inherent in Agile, which is called an Agile release train. But basically, just take a project and run it as a pilot, run it as in Agile methodology, and having a community of practice, going back to the idea of virtual PMO, having connections across the organization. It's a good idea to bring those people in as well. Pick a project that has dependencies with other groups. On the harder side, the biggest step later is actually involving leadership to go all in on Agile, and it might not be the right time to do that. It might be worth having a discussion at least and driving in that direction. But of course, this is a bigger topic, and that includes some of the situations I've been in this year are about saying we're going to move away from the idea of project and stop using that term and that thinking and organize around the idea of a product instead. And that has implications, of course, for how you set up your financial systems. It has implications for how you make decisions and organize people into teams and how you prioritize things. So those are bigger questions. And then, of course, part of turning Agile into a strategic initiative is making sure that change itself has metrics. Meaning, if we are making the case that we should be more agile as an organization, we should establish what that means, how we're going to measure being faster and better. Other things practically that can be done. One thing on the left there is value stream mapping, and that's something you can pilot as a PMO without having to generate a lot of dependencies and issues with other folks or with executive sponsors. And if you're not familiar with that, again, I recommend reading up on it, but in short, value stream mapping, and there are free templates and tools for doing this. Value stream mapping involves looking at your core business processes, whatever your industry may be, whether you're in technology or whether you're in engineering and sales, whatever, and looking at your business in terms of your core products or offerings or streams of value where they have a starting point and then they end in some kind of financial benefit to, or some kind of benefit to you and the customer. So in this case, the example is financial services company and loans. You have these steps that go from getting people to be interested in your loans all the way through to closing and monetizing the loans. And then along the way, this is what you do in value stream mapping. Along the way, you identify all of the systems and all of the people and teams that touch that flow, and what that can do in terms of helping digital transformation is it can start exposing ideas for projects around automating and leaning out those very same business processes or value streams. Now, where that goes eventually, and this is the harder step on the right there, is where you can go eventually is actually organizing your project organization, again, whether it's a technology group or engineering group or whatever it is. The harder step, but an important step for the future after this is actually thinking about, instead of having to deal with 300 projects a year, let's say, and all the headache that entails with getting the right resources on the right thing at the right time, and all those complexities and people changing projects from one to another. The idea here is if you reorganize around value streams and say, well, these 7 value streams are very stable. We're going to be on these value streams for at least the next 3 years. Let's organize our resourcing and our work around those value streams, and that will make it a lot more stable and easier to manage resourcing. It'll enable people to optimize their time without the distractions of multitasking and stopping and starting. And then finally, another tip around Agile to get started on scaling Agile. As a PMO, one of the easier things you can do, but very powerful things, is tap into this Agile principle of, if you show and can visualize the entire portfolio of work, meaning everything that's in just an idea all the way through to stuff that is done, just exposing the visualization of that is a really powerful tool for everybody in the organization, because there's something about that which will intrinsically help people think about prioritization, will help people understand where the future and the important work is. Just showing it is a fantastic first step. So at the portfolio level, what you might show executives would be your portfolio board or Kanban, where you've got everything that's in the funnel for ideas, all the way through to things that are primed and ready to go in the backlog because they've been defined a bit better, and all the way through to things that are executed and done. And then at the program or the solution level, you've got also something similar, but in more detail about what are actually in those work streams, what are the features in the projects and programs, etc. A little more detail there. Now, of course, the hardest step after that is changing your whole model for how you prioritize and decide what to invest in based on economic criteria. And I should point out that while a lot of organizations now are embarking on this, on pretty close to the pure SAFe or scaled agile framework, it's worth bearing in mind that there's actually different versions of SAFe. There is SAFe for programs, for example, and so a lot of organizations today have already started managing their programs using SAFe, but there's also a SAFe for the portfolio, and that's where you're actually rethinking how you do your investment, and that's still a step that a lot of people haven't yet taken. So this is a new focus, and when you get into SAFe for at the portfolio level, then there's these broad implications that impact top to bottom from the executives down. So one is on the top left there, a different approach to how you do your strategic planning, your resource planning, your funding. You're doing it in increments. You're thinking about horizon planning. All of that is tied to new ideas around strategic alignment, which would be based around that idea of value streams instead of some other criteria. And then we would be managing programs, like I said, program SAFe, using the method as well. And on the right there, of course, you're also changing the mindset of everybody, including executives and the sponsors of work, around being all in on this method, because to do portfolio SAFe, you need everybody all in, and that's obviously an evolution. So much for SAFe, and then thinking through about, well, what are the implications on people around evolving the PMO. I think there's two things where I think about it. One is in terms of skills of people you're hiring or rewarding, the shift towards being better at in the new world of digital transformation is I feel less about traditional project management and the controlling, get things done attitude, less about that and more about understanding, proactively suggesting what technology might help with what problems. So that's the proactive nature. Business change skills, transformation skills, so the politics and the empathy. And also, I think diversity of thinking. I think that what I've seen work is having people who just think very differently than you in a project organization. I've seen some examples recently where that's really made a massive difference. And then a second thing that could be done at the PMO level is go back to this idea of virtual PMO, building that community of practice, and getting together with like-minded project organizations in your firm and having these discussions around skills and planning, and also just creating those connections yourselves so that there's more of a trust and understanding and gets you closer to that place of having a common set of criteria that you all agree on, but some freedom to manage and operate independently. And then finally, let's look at how tools are evolving. So this is an illustration I did the other day, which for a particular organization I was working with, and I've genericized it, but this is a very common trend right now, and I'll explain what this is. That in the past, when we've thought about tools and data for the PMO, we often think about one system, the system. But reality is people now don't want to be constrained to one monolithic system. And also, you're likely to have a mix of people doing certain kinds of work, maybe agile, and then others in different departments or units doing things that are more waterfall project management and so on. And you want to be able to combine these approaches and evolve to a future state while empowering people to do what makes sense for the work they're doing. And so if you think of the three tiers of portfolio at the top, products or projects in the middle, and then delivery at the bottom there, at the top layer, and I should stress, we as Microsoft, we're a Microsoft partner, so we tend to work a lot with organizations that have are using Microsoft technology. But the reality is there's always going to be some technology as well that isn't Microsoft, and you have to factor that in as well. So at the portfolio level, to give that visibility, we're using Microsoft Power BI very often, and we're bringing in data from, let's say, an SAP system as well. But one thing we found tremendously impactful this year is using, we created a product called Microsoft One Plan to be able to pull all of this together, the idea of doing portfolio management across a swathe of different technologies and tools, whatever you may be using. And then the other thing that we found really great this year is using Microsoft Power Apps, because Microsoft Power Apps enables you to build workflows and forms in a very rapid way. So think back to the Agile methodology of creating solutions. You want to do it in quick iterations. Well, the nice thing is if you're trying to reorganize and change how you do your tools and data as a PMO, Power Apps has proved to be really good at being quick and easy to stand up and very flexible. And then the middle there, you might have, for example, maybe you've got some people using Microsoft Project because that makes sense for their work, but you might have some people as well who are focused on Agile. So if you're Microsoft-based, you'd be using Microsoft Azure DevOps. Equally, a lot of people use Jira, so that all works too. And then finally, we've often created a third option for people to manage products and projects, all of these being equal, but three different alternatives. And that could be a really simple form based approach to managing stuff. For someone who is never really going to be interested in or learn or take the time to get their heads around a work management tool. And Power Apps has been a great way to create these simple interfaces for people to manage the basics. And you can, all of these three approaches can live happily and be consolidated for portfolio management. And then, of course, you've got delivery and task management, which can happen in, again, any way you like, really. Okay, so that was a recap on this year and some ideas for changing to be more agile. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be sharing some information on this. Enjoy the rest of your day.